It was early morning when Jake Thompson, a truck driver with over 10 years of experience, found himself heading into the mountains once again. He had spent most of his life on the road, delivering goods across the country, from the bustling streets of New York City to the quiet highways cutting through the middle of nowhere. But today felt different. Something in the air was heavy, like the calm before a storm, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that it was going to be a long, strange trip. Jake was in his late 30s, a broad-shouldered man with deep-set eyes that spoke of countless nights spent behind the wheel. His beard, rough and unkempt, matched the look of someone who preferred solitude and the endless hum of an engine over crowded city streets. His truck, a 2012 Peterbilt, had seen better days but still ran like a beast. It was more than just a vehicle to him. It was his companion on the long, lonely stretches of road that he called home. He'd been on the road for nearly 18 hours straight, his body aching from the long hours of driving and lack of sleep. The truck's cabin, though comfortable enough, felt like a prison after being enclosed in it for so long. His eyes were heavy, but there was no time for rest. He still had a long haul ahead of him, climbing up the winding mountain roads to make a delivery at a small industrial complex at the edge of Blackwater Pass. The roads here were treacherous, often slick with ice and snow during the winter months, but it was late spring now, and the road should have been clear. As Jake navigated the twisty curves of the mountain pass, he flicked on his radio, hoping for some distraction. The familiar voice of his favorite DJ came through the speakers, easing the tension in his shoulders for a moment. But it wasn't long before his attention was drawn back to the road. The mist was thick now, rolling down the mountain like a thick blanket, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead of him. He focused on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. The mountain was unforgiving, and Jake had learned over the years that it demanded his full attention. He'd seen accidents, heard stories of trucks that had gone off the road, but he had always managed to avoid those fates. His years of experience had taught him to never take the road for granted. But something was different today. Something felt off. It wasn't the fog. He had driven through fog countless times. No, it was the silence. The eerie, unnerving silence that had settled around him. The usual hum of his engine seemed quieter. The usual road sounds, the soft rattle of the pipes behind him, the occasional whistle of wind through the vents, were strangely absent. All Jake could hear was the steady rhythm of his breathing and the whir of the tires against the asphalt. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road was still, not a single vehicle in sight. But as he turned his attention back to the road, his headlights caught something up ahead. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a patch of fog playing tricks on him. But no. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. A truck, abandoned, its blue exterior barely visible in the mist. Jake's heart skipped a beat. The truck was parked at an odd angle on the shoulder of the road, the driver's door wide open. He slowed down, eyes scanning the area. No one was around. No sign of life. He instinctively reached for his phone, dialing 911. But his signal was weak, and the call dropped before it even went through. Cursing under his breath, he reached for the CB radio, but it crackled to life with nothing but static. Something was wrong. He pulled over cautiously, the gravel crunching under his tires. The eerie silence of the mountain pass was deafening. Jake stepped out of his truck, his boots crunching against the dirt as he walked toward the abandoned vehicle. The closer he got, the more he noticed the details, the bloodstains near the driver's side, the crumpled papers scattered on the ground. He had seen enough in his years of driving to know something was very, very wrong. A chill ran down his spine as he approached the open door. His fingers hovered near his waistband, where he kept a small pocket knife for protection. The feeling in his gut was unmistakable. This wasn't just an abandoned truck. There was something much darker at play here. His heart raced as his mind ran through the possibilities. Was it an accident? A robbery? But the more he thought about it, the more he realized there was no simple explanation for what he was seeing. A crash would leave debris, a broken windshield, maybe some skid marks on the road. But there was none of that. Just the truck, sitting eerily alone in the fog. And then he heard it. A faint sound, almost like a whisper, carried through the air, breaking the silence. Jake froze. It was coming from the woods. He wasn't alone. This was just the beginning. Jake stood there for a moment, his breath hanging in the cool mountain air, eyes fixed on the abandoned truck. The silence around him felt like it was closing in, thick and suffocating. He looked around again, scanning the road for any signs of life, but saw nothing. Not a soul in sight. No passing cars, just the vast, eerie stillness of the mountain pass. He reached for his truck door, intending to get back in and drive away, but something made him hesitate. The whisper he'd heard, it wasn't just the wind. It sounded like a voice, faint but distinct, as though someone, or something, was out there in the woods. His instincts told him to ignore it, to get back on the road, but the unease in his gut told him to investigate further. Taking a deep breath, Jake decided he couldn't just drive away without knowing what had happened here. He grabbed a flashlight from his cab and started walking toward the abandoned truck. The beam of light flickered as he approached, revealing more of the truck's details. The door still wide open, the bloodstains on the ground, and the crumpled papers scattered near the tires. His heart thudded in his chest as he took another cautious step forward, the cold wind biting at his skin. He knelt beside the truck, shining the light over the scattered papers. Most of them were just crumpled forms, but one sheet caught his attention. It was a receipt for a fuel purchase, dated only a few hours ago, but there was no indication of where the driver had gone. The paper seemed out of place, as if it had been left in a hurry. Jake's fingers brushed over the paper, but he quickly pulled his hand back when he noticed a deep crimson stain on the ground near his feet. His gaze followed the stain, leading him to the edge of the road, where he noticed something else, footprints, fresh and deep, leading off into the woods. The tracks weren't animal prints. They were too large, too deliberate. They seemed to be the footprints of a man, someone who had been running or stumbling, his steps unsteady and erratic. A wave of anxiety rushed over Jake. He was alone out here, miles from the nearest town, and there was no telling who, or what, had left these marks. The sound of the wind whistling through the trees seemed to echo louder in his ears as the hair on the back of his neck stood up. Should I call it in? Jake muttered to himself, unsure whether to report the truck or continue on with his delivery. He thought of the drivers he had met over the years, all those late-night conversations at truck stops, and how they always warned him about the strange things that could happen on the road. But this was different. This wasn't just a flat tire or a lost load. This felt wrong. The whispering sound again. This time it was louder, closer. He turned sharply, his flashlight sweeping across the woods. The light caught nothing but trees and mist. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him, his breath shallow as he considered his options. His gut told him to get back in the truck, to keep moving. But something made him take a step forward into the woods, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath his boots breaking the unnatural quiet. The footprints led deeper into the forest, twisting and turning in random directions, as though whoever had made them was trying to escape something, or maybe something was chasing them. Jake's mind raced. Was there someone out here? Was the driver of the truck still alive, or had something happened to him? He took another step forward, then froze as a distant sound echoed through the trees. A rustling, faint at first, then growing louder, like something moving fast through the underbrush. His heart skipped a beat as he turned to look behind him. The fog was rolling in thicker now, and the air seemed to grow heavier, almost suffocating. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but his feet kept moving, drawn forward by the sound of something, someone, just out of sight. The rustling was getting closer now. It wasn't just the wind. There was something, or someone, moving through the woods, and it was getting nearer. Jake's hand instinctively reached for the pocket knife he kept in his jacket, his grip tightening around the handle as the sound grew louder. Suddenly, the rustling stopped. Complete silence. The only sound left was the pounding of Jake's heart in his chest. He spun around, his flashlight darting across the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of life. Just the cold, empty woods. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice trembling in the stillness. No response. It was then that Jake realized how far he had wandered from his truck, from the safety of the road. The fog had thickened, and the forest around him seemed to close in, each tree looking more like a shadow, a dark figure watching him. He turned on his heel, the hairs on his neck standing up as the eerie silence swallowed him whole. Maybe this had been a bad idea. Maybe he should have just called it in. But now he was too far in, and the unsettling feeling that something was following him wouldn't let him turn back. With every step, the trees seemed to shift, their gnarled branches twisting like arms trying to grasp him, pulling him deeper into the dark woods. The only thing that mattered now was getting back to the truck. Jake's pulse was racing as he turned back toward the road, feeling the weight of the forest pressing in on him. His footsteps were quicker now, each crunch of leaves underfoot louder than it had been before. He had strayed too far. The dark, looming trees around him felt like they were closing in, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally under the dim light of his flashlight. He barely registered the figure in front of him until it was too late. A man, tall and unkempt, stepped out from between two thick oak trees, blocking Jake's path. His clothes were torn, and his face was weathered, almost as if he had been lost in the woods for days. His eyes were wild, frantic, and his hair matted in uneven clumps. Jake took a step back, instinctively reaching for the pocket knife in his jacket. The man didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care. He stood still, his gaze fixed on Jake as if he had been waiting for him all along. The hairs on Jake's neck stood on end, and for a moment, he froze. "Keep walking, kid," the man rasped, his voice low and grating. "It's not safe here. Nothing good's on these roads at night." Jake's brow furrowed, unsure of what to make of the warning. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "What do you mean it's not safe?" The man's eyes flickered with something between fear and recognition, but then they hardened as he took a step toward Jake. "You think you're safe just because you've got wheels under you?" The man shook his head slowly, his eyes scanning the trees behind Jake like he expected something to appear. Jake clenched his fists, trying to control the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. "Look, I'm just trying to get back to my truck. I don't know what you're talking about." The man took another step, now within arm's reach, and Jake could smell the sour scent of sweat and dirt. "You've already met him, haven't you?" he asked, his voice suddenly quiet. The question was strange, and Jake didn't immediately understand what the man meant. "Who?" Jake asked, confusion and a hint of panic threading through his words. The man's lips curled into a crooked smile, a strange glint in his eye. "You've seen the truck, heard the stories. Doesn't matter who you think he is. He's part of the road now, part of the hunt." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, his heart racing faster. "The truck, the driver?" The man nodded, almost as if amused. "Oh, he's not the only one, kid. There are others. They follow the road. They always do. Don't matter where you go. Don't matter how far you run. Once you meet him, he won't leave you. The road never lets you go. It just keeps calling." The strange man's words hit Jake like a cold slap. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. You're telling me the truck driver, he's still out there?" The man's smile faded, and his eyes softened, just a little. "Not just the driver. Him too. He's everywhere. Just wait. The road always takes its own." His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "And you'll be next, just like all the others." The woods around them seemed to grow darker, more oppressive, and Jake's instincts screamed at him to get away. But the man's words clung to him, unsettling him in a way he couldn't shake. Every second felt heavier, his feet planted to the ground despite the urge to run. "Listen, I don't know what your deal is," Jake said, his voice shaky now, his eyes darting toward the path he needed to take. "But I'm not sticking around to find out." The man raised a hand, almost lazily, as if blocking Jake's path without care. "You think you're just going to walk away from this, huh? Just like that? The road will take you. It always does." He stepped aside finally, motioning for Jake to move past him. "But be careful. Don't stop. Never stop. If you stop, you'll never leave." Jake didn't hesitate for a second longer. He sidestepped the man, not daring to look back as he practically ran toward the road. The man's chilling words followed him, echoing in his mind. "Never stop. The road always takes you." His breathing was ragged now as he picked up speed, the fog thick around him. He didn't stop to think. He couldn't. The woods were closing in, and his truck was still out there. He needed to get back to it. But as he pushed forward, the feeling of being watched lingered. The silence around him felt unnatural, like something was just beyond the trees, watching his every step. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted down the path, not once looking back. But he could hear the wind whispering through the trees, the man's voice still lingering in his ears, the words twisted and unsettling. "You'll be next." His truck came into view at the edge of the forest, but the sense of unease didn't leave him. It only intensified. The road ahead, long and stretching into darkness, felt more ominous than ever before. As he reached his truck and climbed inside, he locked the doors behind him, hands trembling on the wheel. The engine roared to life, but his mind wasn't at ease. He had no idea what he had just walked into, or what the man had meant. But deep down, he knew one thing for sure. Something wasn't right, and it had followed him all the way here. Jake gripped the wheel tightly as the truck began its slow climb up the winding mountain pass. The road twisted sharply, narrow enough that the tires scraped the edge of the asphalt with every turn. He couldn't shake the unease from the encounter with the strange man, and the darkness of the forest seemed to be closing in around him, pressing harder with each mile. The truck's engine strained against the incline, but it kept chugging forward, tires spinning slightly as they found traction on the gravel. The sky had grown darker, the last remnants of daylight fading away as night swallowed the road ahead. The mountains rose like silent giants on either side, the shadows making the road ahead look like a narrow ribbon of uncertainty. Jake's headlights cut through the darkness, but beyond the reach of their glow, everything seemed hidden. As the truck rumbled on, he tried to push the thoughts of the man and his cryptic warning from his mind. He focused on the road, the familiar hum of the engine, the rhythm of his hands on the wheel. But it didn't take long before the eerie feeling crept back in, the same one that had settled in his stomach when the man had warned him about the road. The curves of the mountains seemed to grow sharper, steeper, as if the road itself was becoming more treacherous. His headlights flickered, the dim glow lighting up the jagged rocks that lined the road. The only sounds were the constant hum of the engine and the occasional squeal of the tires as they gripped the winding path. A sudden gust of wind rattled the truck, making the steering wheel jerk in his hands. He instinctively tightened his grip, but the road was getting more dangerous by the second. His mind raced. This was the kind of road that could break a truck apart if it wasn't careful. The cliffs on one side seemed to drop into nothingness, a dizzying drop that made his stomach twist. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the distance. A shadow, a figure, anything. But there was nothing. Just the road behind him, stretching back into the dark, empty mountain night. He turned the wheel sharply to the left, the truck's wheels screeching as they slid a little too much. He cursed under his breath. The load behind him shifted slightly, rattling the pipes in the trailer, the metallic screeches grating on his nerves. He felt his stomach flip, knowing that if the load shifted too much, he could lose control entirely. The truck kept climbing, and with every curve, it felt like the mountain was testing him, pushing him to see just how far he could go before he lost his grip. Every twist and turn made his pulse quicken. The road was barely wide enough for the truck, and there were no guardrails, nothing to stop the vehicle from tumbling over the edge if something went wrong. As the climb steepened, the truck groaned under the weight, and Jake could feel the stress of the engine struggling to keep up. He had to fight to keep the truck straight, his hands trembling on the wheel, his mind swirling with the sounds of the forest, the rustling of the trees, the sound of the wind. His eyes darted to the right, just catching a glimpse of something in the woods, movement, but only a shadow. He flinched, heart pounding, but when he looked again, there was nothing. His hands were sweaty now, the grip on the wheel almost slipping. The wind howled, and the trees creaked as if the mountain itself was alive, watching him. Just then, a small rock shot out from the edge of the road and hit the side of the truck with a sharp clang, startling Jake. He jerked the wheel instinctively, almost overcorrecting. The trailer behind him swayed dangerously, and for a moment, he feared it might tip over the side. His heart was racing now, and sweat dripped down his face despite the cool air blasting from the vents. He forced himself to take control, muttering under his breath as the truck crept forward. The curves seemed endless, the road winding higher into the mountains. Jake had never felt so small, so exposed. The landscape around him was raw, wild, and unfriendly. He had crossed into a part of the world where man's reach seemed insignificant, where the mountains themselves could claim him if they wished. With every mile, the air grew colder and the darkness thickened. He tried to keep his mind focused, but the unease from earlier gnawed at him. The warning, the strange, cryptic words of the man about the road, about the hunt. It seemed to hang in the air around him. The mountain wasn't just a place. It felt like it was part of something bigger, something ancient. The road climbed higher still, the steep incline becoming more difficult. The engine of the truck rumbled beneath him, fighting the weight of the load, the resistance of the steep mountain pass. The smell of diesel and metal filled the cab, mixing with the sharp scent of pine from the trees that lined the road. Jake could feel the tension in his body, the tightness in his shoulders, the grip of fear that threatened to overtake him. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, determined not to let it beat him. He was a trucker. This was what he did. But tonight felt different. The mountain seemed alive in a way that was beyond his understanding, like it was watching, judging, waiting for him to make a mistake. And then, just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, the road began to level out, and the mountain pass gave way to a valley. Jake's grip on the wheel loosened slightly, the tension in his body easing. The engine settled into a steady rhythm again. The truck was still moving, still intact. He let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The worst of it was behind him. Or so he thought. The road ahead seemed calmer now, quieter, but the ominous feeling didn't leave him. Something still lingered in the air, something that didn't belong. It was as if the mountain was still there, watching him, waiting for him to continue his journey. Jake's grip on the wheel tightened again as he coasted down the mountain, his nerves still on edge from the long climb. The road ahead stretched out in front of him, empty and quiet, but the sense of dread hadn't fully lifted. He glanced in his rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, anything, following him. But there was nothing but the endless stretch of asphalt behind him, disappearing into the dark. He was almost to the valley, almost to the safety of the flat land below, when it happened. Out of nowhere, a bright flash of headlights appeared in his peripheral vision. He barely had time to react before the screech of tires filled the air. The sound of metal on metal. A flash of red. Then a loud, sickening thud as a car swerved directly into his lane. Jake's heart stopped, and instinct kicked in. He slammed his foot on the brake, jerking the steering wheel to the right. The truck swerved dangerously, the trailer behind it swinging out of control. He could hear the sound of the tires screeching as the rig fought against the motion, but it was too late. The car, a small sedan, was coming at him too fast, and the slick road didn't give him much room to maneuver. Jake's body tensed, every muscle screaming as he fought to regain control of the truck. The sedan's headlights grew bigger, closer. The space between them was closing fast. There was no time to think, just react. He turned hard to the left, trying to avoid the impact, but the truck's weight, the momentum of the load, made it impossible to swerve far enough. The world seemed to slow down in that moment. The screeching of the tires, the headlights flashing like an oncoming train, the sickening realization that there was nowhere to go. The impact was unavoidable. The truck collided with the sedan at the front corner. The sound of crumpling metal and shattering glass filled the air. Jake's body was thrown forward against the seatbelt, the force of the crash nearly knocking the wind out of him. His hands clung to the wheel, but the truck was already skidding off the road, the trailer fishtailing behind him, as if it had a life of its own. For a moment, everything was chaos, blinding lights, the sound of metal twisting and scraping, the air thick with the smell of burning rubber and fuel. Then, as quickly as it had started, the truck came to a stop. It was still, but the world around him seemed to spin out of control. Jake sat there for a second, heart pounding, gasping for air. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, his hands still gripping the wheel. The truck's engine was still running, its loud hum filling the air, but all Jake could hear was the ringing in his ears, the aftershock of the crash settling in. He slowly turned his head, his eyes searching the darkness. The sedan was a few feet away, crumpled and mangled, its headlights still on but casting a faint, eerie glow on the side of the mountain. The impact had left the car's front end completely destroyed, but there was no movement, no sign of life from inside. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what had happened or how bad the situation was. His hand fumbled for his phone, but his mind was racing too fast. Should he call 911? What if the person inside the car was seriously hurt? What if it was worse? His mind was a blur, the adrenaline coursing through his veins, urging him to act. He glanced around the cab, trying to steady himself. The truck had skidded to a stop, but the road was narrow, and the drop-off on the side was steep. He didn't know how far down the cliff went, but the idea of losing control again made him dizzy. The silence after the crash was deafening. He couldn't hear anything. No movement from the car, no voices, nothing. A sinking feeling washed over him, and he hesitated, frozen in place for just a moment. He knew he had to check on the other driver, but something held him back. Finally, with shaky hands, he reached for his phone. He needed to call for help. He needed to do something. But as his thumb hovered over the screen, ready to dial, a strange thought occurred to him. The road was isolated, no one around for miles. Was he really alone? A quick glance in the mirror caught his eye. His heart skipped a beat. For a split second, he thought he saw something in the distance, someone standing on the side of the road. But when he looked again, the road was empty. His grip on the phone tightened. He needed to focus. He needed to act. But that lingering sense of something being off, something being wrong, crept back into his mind, like a shadow he couldn't shake. Shaking his head, Jake pushed the thought away and dialed 911. The phone rang, the sound muffled by the roaring silence that seemed to follow the crash. Jake's phone buzzed in his hand, the emergency call ringing out, but before he could speak, something shifted in the air. He felt it before he saw it. A presence, something off, just outside his view. His stomach churned with unease. The silence of the mountain, the cold night air, suddenly felt heavy, oppressive. He froze, his hand hovering over the phone as a shadow stretched across the road. It was like the world had paused, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. His eyes darted toward the front windshield. There, standing just at the edge of the road, was a man. He was tall, too tall, his figure seemingly swallowed by the darkness of the mountain, his face obscured by the dim light of the truck's headlights. Jake's heart skipped. The man wasn't moving, just standing there, his back turned as if he were waiting, like he belonged there, in the middle of nowhere. The sight of him didn't make sense. No one was supposed to be out here. The mountain was empty, save for him and his truck. And yet, this man was here, standing perfectly still, his figure like a ghost. Jake's breath caught in his throat. What was going on? He glanced around. The crash, the sudden appearance of this figure. It was all too much, too strange to be real. His mind tried to dismiss it, tried to tell himself it was just the stress of the crash, the exhaustion. But deep down, he knew that wasn't it. He had to make a decision. Call 911 or confront the man standing in the dark. Hello? Jake called out, his voice sounding too loud in the stillness. The words came out more like a question than a statement, uncertainty lacing his tone. He didn't want to appear vulnerable, but the man didn't respond. No movement. No acknowledgement that Jake had spoken. Jake took a step forward, the gravel crunching beneath his boots as he approached the man. Hey, he called again, louder this time, but the stranger remained silent, still facing away. There was something off about him. His posture was too rigid, too unnatural. He stood like a statue, as though time itself didn't apply to him. And as Jake got closer, the chill in the air seemed to grow colder, crawling beneath his skin. He stopped, about 10 feet away, eyes now fixed on the figure in the dark. The man's hair was long, wild, tangled like it hadn't been touched in years. His clothes, dark, tattered, hung off his thin frame in a way that seemed wrong, like they had been stitched together from mismatched pieces of fabric. But what made Jake's skin crawl the most was the smile. The man's face, partially obscured by shadow, had the faintest hint of a grin stretching across it, wide and unsettling. His teeth, sharp and uneven, glinted in the dim light of the truck's headlights. It was the kind of smile you'd see in a nightmare, a smile that made every instinct in Jake's body scream at him to run. "Who the hell are you?" Jake's voice was shaky, but he forced the words out, his body tense and ready to react. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, his back still turned, but his head tilted ever so slightly, as though he could sense Jake's every movement. The silence stretched, long and drawn out, heavy with an unspoken understanding that made Jake's heart race even faster. Then, without warning, the man turned his head slowly, the motion unnatural and jerky, like something out of a horror movie. When he looked at Jake, their eyes locked, and Jake's breath hitched in his chest. The man's eyes were black, empty, void-like, and there was something impossibly deep about them. It felt like they were staring straight into Jake's soul, stripping him bare. Jake's feet felt like they were frozen to the ground, his legs refusing to move. He couldn't look away, trapped by the man's gaze. The air seemed to press in around him, suffocating, and then the man opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak. But no words came. Instead, the man stepped forward, slow, deliberate, his eyes never leaving Jake's. With every step, the temperature dropped, the cold seeping deeper into Jake's bones. A strange, metallic taste filled his mouth, like fear had a flavor, and he swallowed hard, struggling to breathe, trying to fight the panic creeping up his spine. The man stopped just a few feet away, and for the first time, he spoke in a voice that sent shivers crawling down Jake's back. "Did you think you could leave?" he whispered, his voice low, gravelly, almost like a breath of wind in the dead of night. Jake's mind was racing, thoughts colliding in a frenzy of confusion and terror. He needed to run, to escape, but his body wouldn't cooperate. He stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to tear his gaze away from the figure standing before him. "Who are you?" Jake repeated, his voice barely more than a rasp. The man's smile widened, impossibly wide, as he slowly shook his head, his eyes glinting in the dark. "No one," he murmured, his voice cold as ice. "Just someone who's been waiting." And then, as quickly as he had appeared, the man began to step backward, his movements smooth and unnerving, like he was blending into the shadows, becoming part of the night itself. In the blink of an eye, he was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving only the cold, oppressive silence in his wake. Jake's heart was pounding in his chest. What had just happened? What was that thing? He stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. The fear that had gripped him just moments ago now seemed to grow, thick and suffocating, a presence that refused to leave. His phone was still clutched in his hand. He was still shaking. But when he tried to call 911, he realized with a start that the signal was gone. His phone screen blinked, the connection lost, and a new sense of isolation washed over him. The man was gone, but something else remained. Something that wasn't quite right. Something that had been waiting. Jake's eyes scanned the darkness once again, his body still trembling, and deep down, he knew this night was far from over. Jake's heart was still racing as he stood there, the sudden disappearance of the strange man leaving him shaken to the core. He tried to shake off the feeling, telling himself it was just his mind playing tricks. After all, he'd just experienced a traumatic crash, and things had been chaotic. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. That man, the way he moved, the smile, it wasn't normal. As he climbed back into the truck, his hands were still trembling. He slammed the door shut, locked it, and took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. The dashboard lights flickered for a moment, but it was just a glitch, right? It had to be. He couldn't let his imagination run wild. He needed to get moving, meet the police, and put this whole mess behind him. But as he started the engine, a strange sensation crept up his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on him. It was like someone was watching, even though there was no one around. His hands gripped the wheel a little tighter as he glanced around, his eyes darting from the mirrors to the empty road ahead. The headlights cut through the darkness, but beyond that, nothing. He tried to focus on the road, pushing the panic out of his mind, but every shadow seemed to twist, every movement in the corner of his eye felt like something, or someone, was just out of sight. He'd never felt like this before. The quiet hum of the truck's engine should have been comforting, but instead, it was like a countdown. A ticking clock, marking time until something, someone, would appear again. His hands grew slick with sweat. He checked the rearview mirror again, for the 100th time, but there was nothing. Just the blackness of the road stretching endlessly behind him. He forced his gaze back to the front, pushing the unease to the back of his mind. But then, there it was again. A flicker in the mirror. A movement. He snapped his eyes back to the rear view, his pulse spiking. The road was still empty. But in the reflection, just beyond the headlights, something was off. A shadow, shifting unnaturally, like it was moving with a life of its own. Jake's breath hitched. Was it the man? The same one who had vanished moments before? He scanned the darkness, his eyes darting from side to side, but saw nothing. He wiped a hand over his face, trying to steady his nerves. It's just the exhaustion, he told himself. I'm overthinking it. But the unease wouldn't leave. The road wound on, the headlights illuminating patches of trees and road signs. But something was off. The stillness of the night felt wrong. There was a heaviness to the air, like it was pressing in on him. The trees along the sides of the road seemed to loom closer, their branches twisting into shapes that almost looked like hands reaching for him, clawing at the sky. His hands clenched the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. Focus, he told himself. Just get to the truck stop. Get to Milltown. You're almost there. But his mind kept returning to that feeling of being watched, of being followed. He wasn't alone, and he didn't know why, but he could feel it in his gut. The truck's engine hummed steadily, but now, every sound felt amplified. The wind outside seemed to grow louder, the creak of the truck's frame echoing through the cab. His eyes flicked again to the mirrors, searching for any sign of movement. But the road was still empty, still silent. And yet, the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. It was like something was behind him, something just beyond the reach of his headlights. He wasn't just on a lonely stretch of road anymore. He was in a place where something knew him, where something was waiting. Jake's mind raced as he fought to push the fear aside. He wasn't about to let whatever this was control him. He had to stay in control. But as the miles ticked by, and the silence grew heavier, that feeling continued to creep in. He was being followed. He didn't know by what, or how, but he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, and every time he checked the rear view, it was like something, or someone, was there, just out of sight. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, the static breaking the silence. Jake's heart skipped. He reached out, fingers trembling, to adjust the dial. But before he could, the static shifted, a low hum filling the truck. Wait, what was that? It sounded like a voice, but not quite. Too distant, too distorted. The hairs on the back of Jake's neck stood up. Is someone on the radio? He turned up the volume, his eyes flicking to the display, but the voice faded again, swallowed by more static. He was imagining it. He had to be. The silence returned. Jake exhaled, trying to push the panic down, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. His eyes kept darting to the mirrors, his heart thumping faster each time. The man wasn't here. The figure wasn't real. But the feeling was very real. He wasn't alone. As the truck rumbled on, the pressure in the air seemed to thicken. The trees felt like they were closing in, and with every passing mile, the weight of the mountain and the darkness felt heavier. Something was waiting. And whatever it wasn't going to let him go. Jake's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he tried to focus on the road ahead. His eyes flicked to the phone resting on the passenger seat. A single bar of reception had popped up briefly when he'd descended the mountain, but now it was gone. The signal had vanished completely, leaving the screen blank and lifeless. He reached over and picked up the phone, tapping the screen in frustration. No service. The message flashed back at him, cold and mocking. Great, he thought, just great. He needed to call the police again. He needed to report what had happened, everything. The truck, the strange man, the bizarre encounter. But without a signal, he was stuck, powerless. Jake swore under his breath, trying to focus on the road as the truck jolted slightly over a bump. The night was quiet, too quiet. His headlights swept over the darkened road, but there was nothing but trees and more trees, shadows stretching long under the pale glow. He had to make it to Milltown. He had to get to a place where he could get help, but the empty stretch of road ahead seemed endless. He tapped the phone again, shaking it in his hand, like somehow that would make the signal return. Still nothing. What the hell is going on? He thought. He should be well within range of a tower by now. Maybe I just need to get to a higher point, he rationalized, his mind racing, but the thought did little to calm his growing unease. His phone buzzed suddenly, and Jake's heart skipped. He quickly glanced at it, expecting a call, but it was just a notification, an alert from his GPS. No signal found, it read, just like his phone's status. This wasn't just bad luck. Something was wrong, and the air felt charged, heavy with something that didn't belong. He put the phone back down, eyes glued to the road, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever had been following him, was also interfering with his ability to connect to the outside world. He tried again, but this time his phone wasn't even giving him the courtesy of a no-signal message. It was just dead. His thumb moved aimlessly over the screen as if willing it to come to life. Nothing. The display stayed blank. Jake's pulse quickened, and he started to panic. He should have been able to reach someone by now. His mind ran through possible scenarios. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe it was the storm, or a weird pocket of interference. But he knew. Deep down, it wasn't just that. There was something else at play here. With a frustrated growl, he threw the phone onto the passenger seat and gripped the wheel tighter. He couldn't afford to let his mind wander now. He needed to stay alert. But the more he thought about it, the more everything felt off. Like he was no longer in control. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, but Jake pushed forward, hoping the next turn, the next mile, would bring him to the edge of whatever nightmare this had become. But the longer he drove, the more isolated he felt. The phone, the lack of any contact, the strange man. Nothing made sense anymore. The silence in the truck, the emptiness of the road. It all weighed on him like a growing cloud of dread. He glanced at the phone one last time. It lay there, lifeless, a reminder that something, somewhere, was beyond his reach. Jake's eyes flicked nervously to the rearview mirror as he drove, his mind still racing from the unsettling events. The hum of the engine and the quiet swish of the tires against the wet road were the only sounds in the cab. The night was thick, and the road felt endless, like he was being swallowed by it. The dim light from his headlights barely cut through the fog, but something caught his eye in the mirror. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, a dark shape, or maybe just the blur of his own reflection. But as his gaze lingered, Jake's heart skipped a beat. There, in the mirror, standing just behind him, was a figure. Jake jerked his eyes back to the road, heart hammering in his chest. He hadn't seen anyone else on the road for miles. He hadn't passed another car for hours. The figure was impossible. Yet, when he glanced at the mirror again, it was still there. It wasn't a reflection of the road behind him. It was a person, a tall, shadowy figure that seemed to flicker in and out of existence like some kind of apparition. Their face was indistinct, like it was covered in a mist, but the outline was clear enough. Their arms hung at their sides, motionless. Jake slammed his foot on the brake, swerving slightly. What the hell was that? His breath caught in his throat as he quickly checked the mirror again, but this time, the figure was gone. The space behind him was empty. The panic started to rise in him again. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it. It's just your mind playing tricks on you, Jake, he thought. The stress, the long drive, the isolation, it's getting to you. But something felt off. The air in the cab had grown colder, and the fog outside seemed thicker now, pressing in on him. He tried to shake the feeling, gripping the wheel tighter, eyes fixed straight ahead. But even though he was focused on the road, the image of the figure lingered in his mind. It was like the mirror had shown him something he couldn't explain, something that didn't belong. He glanced at it again, hoping for some normal reflection, but when he did, he froze. There was a faint movement in the mirror. The same shadowy figure was there once more, standing behind him. It was closer this time, almost as if it had been drawn toward him. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't imagining it. The figure wasn't just in the mirror, it was in the truck. But when he whipped around to look behind him, the back seat was empty. The figure was only in the reflection. Panic surged through him, and his pulse raced. The temperature in the cab seemed to drop even more, his breath now fogging in the air in front of him. The figure's features slowly came into focus, but they were still indistinct, like a blurry shadow, their form shifting, melting, and reforming with every glance. Jake's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. His eyes flicked from the road to the mirror, and the figure was still there, closer now. It raised one hand, slowly, almost as if it was beckoning him. He slammed his foot down on the accelerator, the truck lurching forward, the engine roaring to life beneath him. But even as the speedometer climbed, even as the truck surged forward, he couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still there, following him, lurking in the reflection. It's just in your head, he told himself again, but it didn't feel like it. Every instinct he had screamed that something was wrong, that he was being watched, that something was coming for him. And it wasn't just in the mirror. Jake pressed harder on the gas pedal, the lights of Milltown still far ahead, the darkness thickening around him. He couldn't escape it. Whatever was following him, whatever he had seen in that mirror, wasn't just a trick of his mind. It was real, and it was coming. Jake's grip on the wheel tightened as he sped through the night, the silence of the cab only interrupted by the steady hum of the truck's engine. The road ahead was still shrouded in fog, and the lights from the town seemed miles away, offering no comfort. His heart was still racing from what he'd seen in the mirror, but now, a new unease settled over him. The radio crackled to life. At first, it was just static, a low buzzing noise that made him wince. But then, something else started to creep through the static, a low, guttural hum, almost like a whisper. He leaned forward, squinting at the radio, wondering if the signal was messing with him. The sound wasn't from a station. It wasn't music or a voice, just a strange hum that seemed to vibrate in the air around him. Jake reached for the dial, turning it, hoping to get a clear station. But no matter what he did, the sound stayed. It was faint at first, like distant voices, but then it grew louder, deeper, almost rhythmic. Like something was speaking, but the words weren't quite right. The tones were distorted, echoing, and for a moment, he couldn't tell if they were in his head or if the radio was really picking them up. He froze, his fingers hovering over the dial. The hum shifted again. This time, it sounded more like a chant, layered with something unrecognizable, like multiple voices overlapping. The static turned into a slithering noise, like something was crawling through the speakers. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He glanced nervously around the cab, half expecting to see something lurking in the dark corners. But the truck's interior was still and empty. His mind raced. Maybe it's just the radio malfunctioning, he thought, but it didn't feel like that. This wasn't just bad reception, it was wrong. Like it was intentional. Like it was meant to be heard. The sound grew louder, vibrating in his bones. And then, beneath it, barely audible at first, he thought he heard something even worse. Laughter. It was faint at first, like a dry rasp, distant and haunting. It sent a chill down his spine, and Jake couldn't help but look over his shoulder again, half expecting to see the figure from the mirror sitting right behind him, grinning that wide, unnatural grin. He slammed the power button on the radio, desperate to silence the noise, but nothing happened. The sound only intensified. Now it was louder, clearer, and the laughter, that eerie, guttural chuckling, seemed to grow louder, closer, as if it was coming from the very speakers themselves. "Shut up," Jake yelled, his voice cracking in the stillness of the cab. His hands shook as he turned the dial again, twisting it as hard as he could, trying to change the frequency, but the radio wouldn't stop. The laughter didn't stop. Then, without warning, the sound stopped. The radio went silent, as if someone had hit a mute button. The only thing Jake could hear was the sound of his own rapid breathing, the pounding of his heart in his chest. But even in the silence, a part of him could still hear it, that laugh, echoing in the back of his mind. He gripped the wheel harder, his eyes darting between the road and the mirror. Was it over? Had it really stopped? The cabin was still. The only sound now was the rush of wind outside and the low rumble of the truck's engine. But Jake knew, deep down, that whatever was happening, it wasn't over. And that laugh, it was still with him, buried in the back of his mind, waiting to come back. The road stretched on, seemingly endless, as Jake's eyes flicked nervously between the rearview mirror and the fog-choked road ahead. He couldn't shake the feeling. It was like something was watching him, following him through the darkness. Every time he glanced at the mirrors, there was nothing, just the empty stretch of road behind him, swallowed by the thick fog. But he felt it. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. His gut twisted, a creeping sense of unease building with every passing mile. It wasn't just the strange sign or the eerie silence. It was the feeling that someone, or something, was out there, lurking just beyond his sight. He checked the mirrors again, more frantic this time, but again, nothing. Just the empty, shadowy road. Still, the feeling didn't fade. Jake's foot tapped nervously against the gas pedal as he reached for the radio, desperately trying to drown out the tension in the air with some background noise. But as soon as he turned the dial, static flooded the speakers, a low hum that made his skin crawl. He quickly twisted it back to silence, but even that felt worse than the static. The quiet seemed too quiet, stretching on forever like the world had gone still, holding its breath. A movement in the corner of his eye snapped him back to attention. He whipped his head toward the passenger's side, heart pounding in his chest, but there was nothing there. "Come on, Jake. Get a grip," he muttered to himself, hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. But the feeling didn't go away. It was as if someone, something, was right behind him, moving in tandem with his every turn and swerve. It was like he was being watched. And not from some far-off distance, but up close, like someone was just out of view, following him with every mile he drove. The fog had become thick again, almost impenetrable, and the headlights barely pierced the swirling mass of white in front of him. The trees along the side of the road looked like dark, twisted shapes, their branches reaching out like fingers. Jake's pulse raced faster now, his grip tightening on the wheel. His eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, then back to the road ahead. The sense of being followed was overwhelming. It felt like whatever it was gaining on him, getting closer with each passing second. He reached down to his phone, his hands shaking as he fumbled with it. He needed to call someone, anyone. But as he looked down, his phone's screen flickered, the signal cutting out before he could even dial. "Great," Jake muttered under his breath. No signal again. The sensation of being watched intensified, clawing at him like something was pressing against his chest. He couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something out there. Jake stepped on the gas a little harder, the truck roaring to life as he pushed it faster through the fog. But even as the truck picked up speed, the feeling of being pursued didn't fade. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger. He had to make it out of here. Whatever was out there in the darkness, whatever had been following him, he had to lose it. He couldn't let it catch him. The truck's engine growled as Jake pressed the accelerator harder, trying to push through the fog and the growing unease in his chest. The trees lining the road seemed to blur together, like shadowy figures closing in on him. The air inside the cab was thick with tension, the silence oppressive except for the sound of his own breathing. Then, just as the truck crested a hill, the headlights caught something. A figure standing in the middle of the road. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt just a few feet from the man. His breath caught in his throat as he stared out the windshield. There he was again, the same man. The same unsettling smile stretched across his face, twisted and wide, like it didn't quite belong. His clothes were still ragged, dirt-stained, his hair matted and unkempt, but it was his eyes that froze Jake in place. Those dark, hollow eyes that seemed to be staring directly into his soul, as if he knew everything about him. Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. He couldn't look away. The man stood there, motionless, as if waiting. "What do you want?" Jake whispered, his voice barely audible, the words caught in his throat. The man didn't answer. He didn't move either. He just stood there in the middle of the road, like he was daring Jake to approach. A surge of panic jolted through Jake's chest. He wasn't going to sit here forever. He needed to keep moving. He needed to get away from this nightmare, whatever it was. With a shaky breath, he threw the truck into reverse, the tires screeching against the pavement as he backed up, trying to put distance between himself and the strange man. But as he shifted into drive and started to move forward again, the man didn't budge. He just stayed there, his cold gaze never leaving Jake. Jake's mind raced. He was so close to getting out of this, but something felt off. That smile, it wasn't just a smile. There was something wrong about it. It didn't feel like a smile at all. It felt like a trap, a lure, something designed to pull him in. As the truck rolled past, the man's head tilted ever so slightly, his smile widening. But as Jake's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, he saw something that made his stomach churn. The man was moving. Not in the way a normal person would walk, but shifting, as if he wasn't quite standing on the ground. His legs weren't in sync with his body, and his movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled too tight. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't stop. He had to get away. But the more he tried to drive, the more he felt that pull, that presence. The man's smile stayed with him. A lingering image burned into the back of his mind. Something wasn't right. He was being followed, again. The fog closed in around him, thick and suffocating, as if the road itself was swallowing him whole. And behind him, that figure was still there, still in pursuit, just beyond the edge of his vision. The man wasn't going to let him go. The reality of that hit Jake all at once. He wasn't just running from some random encounter. He was running from something far worse. Something that wouldn't stop until it had him. Jake's hands shook as he pulled into the small truck stop just outside the town. The dim lights of the diner flickered above him, offering some semblance of comfort in the midst of the cold, dark night. He had to stop. His nerves were frayed, and the eerie presence that had been following him for hours was wearing him down. He parked his rig, still uneasy, and decided to head inside. The bell above the door chimed when he stepped in, but the warmth that hit him didn't provide the comfort he needed. The place was empty, save for a lone man sitting at the counter, his back hunched, staring into a steaming cup of coffee. Jake hesitated for a moment, but exhaustion won out. He walked up to the counter and sat down 2 stools away from the man. He tried to ignore the strange feeling crawling up his spine. The way the man's silence seemed to stretch too long. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, came over and set a coffee in front of Jake. She didn't say anything, just went about her business, her presence a quiet reassurance in the otherwise unsettling atmosphere. Jake took a deep breath and tried to focus on something. Anything, other than the growing anxiety gnawing at him. He had just taken a sip of the coffee when he heard a voice from across the counter. "Long night?" the man asked, his voice raspy, like he hadn't used it in a while. Jake froze, his stomach flipping. He looked up slowly, his gaze meeting the stranger's. The man was older, maybe in his late 40s, with a weathered face and dark, piercing eyes that seemed to peer straight into Jake's soul. He had a rough, almost unsettling presence about him, as if he didn't quite belong. "Yeah," Jake managed to say, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "Just trying to get through the night." The man chuckled, a dry, empty sound. "You don't really get through the night around here. The night gets through you," he said, his eyes never leaving Jake's. Jake swallowed hard, the words hanging in the air. There was something wrong about this man, something Jake couldn't quite put his finger on. But the more the man spoke, the more unsettled Jake became. "The road's a strange thing," the man continued, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's not just the distance that gets to you. It's the things that follow you. Things that never leave." Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't want to hear more, but something about the man's words felt familiar. His mind raced back to the figure he'd seen earlier, the same man who'd been chasing him. "What do you mean?" Jake asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice cracked slightly. The man smiled, and it was the same smile Jake had seen before, wide, unsettling, with too many teeth. It sent a chill down his spine. "Oh, You'll find out soon enough, the man replied, his voice thick with knowing. They always find you when you think you've escaped. Jake felt his throat tighten, but he managed to force a laugh. I'm just passing through. Nothing's following me. The man's eyes gleamed. No one really passes through, he said quietly. You can keep driving, but you're always going to be on the road, and the road never ends. Not for you. Jake's pulse quickened. He had to leave. He couldn't stay here, talking to this man who was saying things that didn't make sense. I'm going to get going, Jake said, his voice more strained than he intended. The man didn't stop him. He just watched Jake with those unervingly dark eyes, his smile never fading. Take care on the road. The man called after him, his tone dripping with something dark. It's not the truck that gets you, it's what's inside it. Jake didn't respond. He quickly paid the waitress and left, his footsteps echoing in the empty diner. As soon as he stepped outside, the cold air hit him like a slap, and he rushed to his truck, trying to shake off the feeling that something was watching him. Something, waiting. As he started the engine, the eerie words from the man lingered in his mind. What did he mean? What was it that followed Jake? The road? The man? The truck hummed to life, but the silence that followed felt heavier now, more oppressive. And as Jake pulled back onto the highway, the headlights cutting through the darkness, he couldn't help but wonder if he was still being followed by something far worse than just a figure in the shadows. Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he barreled down the winding road, the headlights cutting through the thickening fog. His mind raced with the words the strange man had spoken, their weight settling uneasily in his chest. It was as if the air around him was heavier, more suffocating, and no matter how hard he tried to push it out of his thoughts, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was waiting. He pressed his foot harder on the accelerator, determined to make it through this stretch of road. He didn't know what to believe anymore. Was he losing his mind? Or was there something sinister out here with him? Something that didn't want to let him go? The road ahead stretched out in front of him, lined with trees that seemed to grow closer with every mile. The wind picked up, rattling the windows, but the world outside the truck was eerily quiet. No sounds of animals, no distant rustle of wind, just the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the truck's frame. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared in his headlights, a man, standing right in the middle of the road. Jake slammed his foot on the brakes, but it was too late. His truck swerved, tires screeching as the figure didn't move an inch. Jake had no time to react. The truck collided with the man with a sickening thud, the sound of metal and bone meeting echoing in his ears. The truck jolted violently, sending Jake's body lurching forward against the seatbelt. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to regain control of the wheel. The man? No, the thing he had hit, didn't even stumble. It didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it remained standing in the middle of the road, perfectly still, as if the collision hadn't happened at all. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He could feel his pulse in his neck, thumping harder than ever. He quickly threw the truck into park and flung open the door, adrenaline pumping through his veins. His eyes darted toward the road, where the figure still stood. Nothing. The figure was gone. In the few seconds it took for Jake to unbuckle his seatbelt and step out of the truck, the road was empty. No sign of the man. No blood. Just the empty stretch of pavement in the cold, silent night. Jake's mind raced. What the hell just happened? He had hit him. He had to have hit him. The truck wasn't just a small vehicle. It was a massive rig. There was no way the guy could have just disappeared. He took a step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel as he scanned the road. His breath fogged in the air, and the eerie quiet of the night pressed in on him like a weight. His gut twisted, but he had to check. He had to make sure. But no matter where he looked, there was nothing. No sign of the man. No trace of a collision. It was like he had never been there at all. Jake's hands shook as he slowly backed away from the road. His truck loomed behind him, but it suddenly felt far less like a safe haven and more like a cage. He climbed back into the cab, slamming the door behind him. His fingers trembled as he turned the ignition, and the truck roared to life once more. As he pulled away from the spot where the figure had stood, the unease in his stomach only grew. He could still feel the crash in his bones, the undeniable sensation of hitting something. But now, it was as if it had all been a dream. No, a nightmare. Jake looked back in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure standing there again, watching him. But it was just darkness. Just the road stretching behind him. It didn't matter how many miles he drove. He couldn't shake the feeling that the road wasn't empty. Something, or someone, was always out there, just beyond the reach of his headlights. And no matter how fast he went, no matter how far he traveled, it was never truly behind him. It was always ahead, waiting. Jake's heart was pounding in his chest, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind couldn't keep up with the chaos swirling around him. The crash, the disappearance, the strange man in the middle of the road who, against all logic, hadn't seemed to move, hadn't even reacted when he hit him. He glanced into the rearview mirror once again, half expecting to see him standing there. That sickeningly wide smile stretched across his face, waiting in the dark. But no, there was nothing but empty road behind him. The trees blurred past as the truck tore through the night, the fog thickening with every mile. The weight of his thoughts was unbearable, but what disturbed him the most was the nagging sense that he hadn't been alone, that whatever he had just experienced was only the beginning. Suddenly, the road ahead started to twist sharply. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing pulse, focusing on the curve. But out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of movement caught his attention. He slammed on the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt. In front of him, standing at the edge of the road, was the man again. But something was different. He wasn't just standing. He was fading. Slowly, like smoke dissipating in the wind, the man's figure began to blur, the edges of his body becoming less and less distinct. Jake blinked hard, trying to process what he was seeing. The man was vanishing. One moment he was there, perfectly solid, in the middle of the road, his clothes ragged, his expression unreadable, that strange smile still frozen on his face. And the next, he wasn't. His body seemed to shimmer, the outlines of his arms and legs distorting, bending unnaturally, before melting into the night like fog swallowed by the darkness. Jake's breath hitched, his mind screaming in disbelief. He couldn't just be imagining this, could he? He had seen it. He had seen the man standing there. He had hit him, hadn't he? But now, the only thing left behind was the fading afterimage of someone who had never truly been there at all. The faintest trace of the man's figure lingered for just a moment longer, like a shadow cast by a light that had long since been turned off. And then, as though it had never existed, it was gone. Gone. Vanished. Jake's hands were shaking uncontrollably now, his chest tight, every breath feeling like it could be his last. He took his foot off the brake and slowly eased the truck forward, his eyes fixed on the spot where the man had just been. But there was nothing. The road was empty, quiet. The trees stood still in the shadows, untouched by the scene that had just unfolded. It was as if the man had never existed, as if his appearance, his very presence, had been nothing more than a trick played on Jake's mind. But deep down, Jake knew it hadn't been. He had felt the collision. He had seen the man. And now, he had witnessed him disappear. A cold chill crawled up Jake's spine. He had never felt more alone in his life. There was no logical explanation for what he had just experienced, but one thought burned through his mind. Whatever this was, whatever was following him, it was far from over. Jake slammed his foot back on the accelerator, his eyes scanning the road ahead, now more alert than ever. But as the truck sped off into the night, one thing was certain. There was no escaping whatever had just happened. The road stretched on before him, endless and dark, but he knew that somewhere out there, something was waiting for him to come back. And this time, it wouldn't let him go so easily. The truck rattled down the empty highway, its headlights slicing through the thick fog that had settled over the land like a heavy blanket. Jake's mind was a whirlwind of questions, but the more he thought, the more the answers seemed to slip away, like sand through his fingers. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him, something just out of sight, lurking in the shadows of the road ahead. As he drove, the landscape around him began to shift. The trees grew thinner, the hills less steep. The road stretched on endlessly, with no signs of life in sight. No cars, no lights, no signs of civilization. It felt like he was driving into the heart of nowhere. Then, as if the emptiness itself had pulled him in, Jake saw it. In the distance, just at the edge of his headlights, a dim glow flickered. A cluster of buildings, barely more than a handful of darkened structures, sitting silent and still. His heart skipped a beat as he saw the faded neon sign of a diner, its flickering light barely hanging on, casting an eerie glow over the abandoned street. This was no ordinary town. It was a ghost town. Jake pulled into the deserted street, the sound of the truck's tires grinding against the pavement almost unnervingly loud in the stillness. The buildings were old, their windows cracked or boarded up, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. The diner, though still standing, had clearly seen better days. Its windows were clouded with grime, and the parking lot was empty, save for a few stray weeds growing through the cracks in the asphalt. He parked the truck, hesitating for a moment as he took in the eerie silence. No sounds of birds, no distant hum of traffic, just the rustling of the wind through the trees and the faint buzz of the flickering lights above. Stepping out of the truck, Jake pulled his jacket tighter around himself. The temperature had dropped even further, and the chill in the air felt like it was crawling under his skin. He stood there for a moment, looking around at the vacant streets. It felt as if time had stopped here. Everything about the place screamed abandonment. Was this even a real town? Or had he somehow driven into some kind of nightmare? He started walking toward the diner, drawn by some force he couldn't quite explain. The closer he got, the more the place seemed to feel wrong. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, as if the very town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As Jake stepped onto the porch, the door to the diner creaked open. It wasn't the wind. This door was moving all on its own, as though someone had just stepped inside, though no one was there. His instincts screamed at him to turn around, to get back in the truck and drive away as fast as possible. But something inside him, something darker, urged him to step inside. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. The diner's interior was dimly lit, with rows of dusty booths and a counter that was littered with old menus and half-empty glasses. The smell of stale coffee and old grease lingered in the air, and the floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he stepped further inside. It was dead silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the occasional rattle of something in the back. The place felt like a place frozen in time, abandoned by everyone except for the lingering echoes of those who had once passed through. Jake's eyes darted to the back of the diner, where a figure stood in the shadows. A man, his face obscured by the darkness, staring out a cracked window. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice sounding strangely loud in the silence. The figure didn't move. He remained perfectly still, just staring out the window as though Jake wasn't even there. Jake took a step forward, his heart racing. Something was very wrong here. "Hey, are you okay?" He tried again, his voice slightly shaky. Finally, the man turned his head, his eyes empty, hollow. He blinked slowly, as though waking from a deep sleep. When he spoke, his voice was soft, raspy, almost as if it hadn't been used in years. "You shouldn't have come," the man whispered, his eyes locking onto Jake's with an intensity that sent a cold shiver down his spine. Jake froze. His throat went dry, and he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something in the man's voice, in his eyes, made the air feel thick, suffocating. Before he could respond, the door to the diner slammed shut behind him with a loud bang, and the lights above flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator, but even that seemed to be fading away, like it was being swallowed up by the silence. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen in the middle of the dim diner. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes you feel like something is just waiting to pounce. He glanced around the empty room, his eyes darting between the cracked windows, the empty booths, and the figure in the corner. That man, the one who had spoken in that eerie, hollow voice, was still there, but now he was watching Jake, his eyes locked on him with unnerving intensity. The hairs on the back of Jake's neck stood up, but before he could take a step back or say anything else, his phone buzzed in his pocket, cutting through the oppressive silence. He jumped at the sudden noise, quickly pulling it out, hoping for something, anything, to break the strange, suffocating atmosphere. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. It wasn't the police, but his mind raced to make sense of it. Maybe it was a wrong number. Or maybe it was a sign, telling him to leave. He answered with a shaky breath. Hello. A pause. Static. Then, a voice, calm, steady, and far too familiar for comfort. Is this Jake Mitchell? The voice asked. It was a deep voice, the kind that carries authority, but with something unsettling underneath. Yeah, who is this? Jake asked, his pulse quickening. His eyes flickered nervously toward the man in the corner, who hadn't moved an inch. The air seemed to freeze again. This is Officer Welch. We've been trying to get in touch with you. We need to talk about the truck you reported on Route 52. Where are you now? Officer Welch's voice was still smooth, but there was a certain urgency behind his words that made Jake's stomach drop. I'm at a diner, Jake said, glancing around again, his throat dry. A town called. I don't know. It's not on any map. It's just empty. Stay where you are. Officer Welch instructed, his voice sharp now. There's something we need to tell you. We've got a report. That driver you mentioned, Ben Russo, his truck was found, but there's something you need to know. It's not what you think. Jake's mind spun. What do you mean? What's going on? Just wait. We've got units on their way to you. We need to make sure you're safe. Don't go anywhere. Do you understand? Jake's throat tightened. Yeah, I understand. The line went dead. Jake stood there, holding his phone, staring at the screen in disbelief. The conversation had been brief, but the weight of the words hung heavily in the air. The truck was found. And Ben Russo, he had been right. Something wasn't adding up. The voice of Officer Welch had carried an underlying tone of concern, but it was clear that something else was happening. Something more sinister than Jake had imagined. He didn't know if he should wait for the officers or if he should leave. His instincts screamed at him to get out of there, to keep moving. But where would he go? This town, this place, it wasn't on any map. There was nowhere to run. Jake's hands trembled as he stuffed the phone back in his pocket. He glanced over at the man again, who was still watching him, that same vacant expression on his face. The unsettling silence in the diner seemed to stretch longer with every passing second. Whatever was happening, Jake was beginning to realize that he wasn't going to leave this place unscathed. He had no choice but to wait, and to hope that help was really on its way. Jake sat frozen in the booth, his fingers wrapped tightly around the edge of his coffee cup, the once warm liquid now cold and forgotten. The room felt heavier, suffocating. His eyes kept darting back to the man in the corner of the diner, who had yet to move. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. It was as though the diner itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He tried to steady his nerves, to focus on the call he'd just received from Officer Welch, but the more he thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle didn't fit. He could feel it in his gut, the knowledge that there was something here, something deep and dark, that was far beyond what he had ever expected. The more he sat there, the more the situation started to unravel in his mind. The phone call had been strange, yes, but it was the things Officer Welch hadn't said, the things left unsaid in the pauses, that kept gnawing at him. Ben Russo, the missing driver, had been found, but why hadn't the police gone into more detail? Why had they just asked him to wait? He couldn't shake the feeling that the officer knew more than he was letting on. And then, there was the town. The empty, nameless town. The roads, the places that didn't show up on maps. The feeling of being pulled into something that wasn't just happening to him. It was happening to everyone, to the very land beneath his feet. It was then that the truth struck him, a horrifying realization so chilling that it took his breath away. The man in the corner of the diner wasn't just some stranger. He had been watching Jake long before Jake had even noticed him. This wasn't just a random stop. The thing that had followed him, the thing that had spoken to him through the phone, had been preparing him for this moment. Jake was being led into something far darker than he could have ever imagined. Suddenly, it clicked. The truck. The driver. The strange occurrence with the phone. The towns that didn't exist. It wasn't just a bad string of luck. It was the road. The endless, cursed road that never lets you leave. The people it took, like Ben Russo, never really leave. They become part of the road. The thing Jake had felt at the back of his mind, that strange pull to keep driving, to keep moving. It wasn't just his fear. It was the road's call, drawing him in, and now it was too late. Jake's blood ran cold. He was never meant to leave. Not now, not after everything that had happened. He had already become a part of this twisted cycle, like all the others before him. The man in the corner finally stood up, slow and deliberate, his eyes locking with Jake's in a way that sent a shiver up his spine. There was no escape. This was the moment. He wasn't just running from a man. He was running from the road, the curse that clung to every inch of asphalt, every town that didn't exist on any map. Jake opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His entire body was frozen, paralyzed with fear. The man took a step forward, his smile widening, and Jake realized then that it wasn't a man at all. It wasn't even human. The smile, that impossible grin, stretched unnaturally across the figure's face. And with that realization, Jake understood everything. The horror he had been experiencing was just the beginning. He was never going to escape. The road would keep calling, dragging him deeper into its unrelenting grasp. As the man approached, Jake stood up, his legs shaky, his mind racing. The room seemed to darken, the air thickening with every step the figure took. And then, the diner door swung open, and a gust of wind whipped through the room, extinguishing the lights. The figure in front of him began to dissolve, its form fading into the shadows. Jake wasn't sure what had happened, if he was still awake or if it was all some twisted dream, but he knew one thing for sure. The road had him. Jake's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, the familiar hum of the engine beneath him now somehow hollow, oppressive. The diner's lights had faded behind him as he pulled back onto the road. The vast emptiness stretched out ahead, and for the first time, the road seemed alive, alive with an intent, pulling him back, forcing him forward. He glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure from the diner, the man whose smile still haunted his thoughts. But there was nothing, just darkness, just the road. The further he drove, the more oppressive the silence became. It wasn't the normal silence of the night, the kind he'd always known. This was different. It was a suffocating silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. It felt like the road itself was watching him, listening to his every thought. The headlights barely cut through the thick darkness that clung to the pavement. He wanted to turn back. He wanted to find another way, to escape whatever had him trapped in this nightmare. But every time he considered turning off, the road seemed to tighten its grip, pulling him back in, forcing him to keep going. Jake thought about the man's words at the diner, the horrible truth about the road, the curse that came with it. There was no escaping it. He had already crossed the point of no return. The trees along the roadside blurred as he drove, their twisted shapes seeming to reach out like skeletal hands trying to grab him. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were closing in, that he was being herded into something bigger than himself, something he had no control over. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and for a brief moment, it felt like a lifeline, a connection to the outside world, to sanity. But when he pulled it out, the screen was cracked. The signal was gone. Nothing but static. The air in the truck grew colder, and his breath fogged up the windshield. It wasn't the normal cold, though. This was different, unnatural. The temperature dropped so fast that it felt like the world itself had just shifted, and he was now driving through a place that existed outside of time. He glanced at the gas gauge, still full, but somehow the truck felt like it was slowing down, like it was losing its power, as if the engine itself was giving up. The headlights flickered, and for a split second, the road ahead appeared to warp, as if it was folding in on itself. Jake slammed on the brakes, his heart racing as he tried to focus. But the road kept shifting, twisting into an impossible path that stretched on forever. And then, as if everything had been building toward this moment, it happened. The road ahead disappeared, replaced by a cliffside. There was no warning, no signs, no way to stop. He tried to swerve, tried to turn the wheel, but it was as if the truck was no longer his own. The controls seemed to have a life of their own, pushing him forward. Jake's heart was in his throat as the truck barreled toward the edge of the cliff, and just before he reached the drop, the road shifted again, snapping back into place beneath him. He had no time to process what had just happened. The ground was solid beneath him once again, but it felt wrong, like he wasn't supposed to be there. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to stop, to get out, to run. But the road wouldn't let him. The wheels spun beneath him, the tires biting into the asphalt, and the engine roared to life again, as if the road had taken control. He couldn't stop it. He couldn't escape. Jake stared at the road ahead, knowing, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Whatever had followed him, whatever had been waiting for him, was now in control. There was no going back. There was no way out. The road had him, and it wasn't going to let him go. The headlights cut through the darkness once more, illuminating the path ahead. But Jake didn't know if it was the way to freedom or another endless loop of despair. He couldn't turn back, couldn't change his course. The road stretched out, waiting to swallow him whole, and all he could do was drive, driven forward by something he couldn't name, something that seemed to want him to keep going, to never stop. Jake's hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes were glued to the road ahead, but he no longer recognized the place he was driving through. The trees had become dark, twisted shapes, their branches swaying in unnatural ways as if they were alive, reaching out to pull him into the darkness. The headlights barely cut through the fog that had settled, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of him. The truck had been driving for what felt like hours, or maybe days. Time didn't seem to matter anymore. He glanced at the dashboard, the clock flashing 3:17 a.m., but even that seemed wrong. How had it gotten so late? Or had it always been this late? The numbers on the clock felt like a cruel joke, mocking him as he drove deeper into this endless, empty place. The words from the diner echoed in his mind. The road never ends. He had dismissed them as madness, a terrible story from a stranger trying to scare him. But now, as he drove further, he realized the truth of those words. The road didn't end. It wasn't just the stretch of highway in front of him. It was the entire world around him. The road was everything. The road was endless. Jake's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit him like a freight train. The man, the strange figure that had appeared time and time again, hadn't been following him. It wasn't a random encounter. He hadn't been running from something. He had been running toward something. Toward this road. Toward the never-ending cycle that had been waiting for him. The fog thickened as the truck's engine hummed along, the rhythmic sound lulling him into a trance-like state. He couldn't stop it, no matter how hard he tried. He couldn't stop the truck, couldn't stop the road from pulling him forward. A chill swept through the cab, colder than before. His breath fogged up the windshield as he looked into the rearview mirror. This time, he didn't see anything, no man, no figure lurking in the darkness behind him. But he didn't need to see it anymore. He knew. He knew what he had become. The road had claimed him. He had been driving this path for so long. It had become part of him, and he was now part of it. There was no escape. There was no turning back. This road was his fate, and he had chosen it the moment he had driven onto it, the moment he had started this journey. Jake let out a shaky breath, his mind finally understanding the truth that had eluded him for so long. The man, the one who had appeared in the mirrors, the one who had haunted his every step, wasn't a person at all. It was the road itself, the force that had guided him, that had drawn him into this never-ending nightmare. The road had always been alive, and it had always been waiting for him. And now he was part of it. The headlights blinked, and for a moment, the road ahead seemed to twist and turn in on itself, as if folding into an infinite loop. Jake's chest tightened as he realized there was nowhere to go. The road wasn't just a place, it was a trap, and he was its prisoner. His grip on the wheel loosened as the realization settled over him like a heavy weight. The road had claimed him, and there was no way out. No end. No escape. The truth was clear now. He wasn't just driving on this road. He was the road. The road would keep going. And so would he. And as the fog swallowed the truck, Jake knew in the deepest part of his soul, that the road would never end. It would never stop, and neither would he. The chill hit Jake like a punch in the gut. 1 minute, the truck's cab had been warm, the heater blasting, keeping the cold at bay, but now, it was like someone had opened a window to the Arctic. The temperature dropped so suddenly that he could see his breath, faint clouds of condensation puffing out in front of him with every exhale. His fingers trembled as he reached to turn up the heater, but the dial didn't seem to respond. The warmth from the vents was gone, replaced by an icy draft that seemed to seep in from every crack and crevice of the truck. He rubbed his hands together, trying to warm them, but the cold seemed to gnaw at him from the inside, sinking deep into his bones. What the hell's going on? He thought, his heart racing. Jake pulled the collar of his jacket tighter around his neck, but it didn't help. The cold was relentless, biting, like it was coming from somewhere inside the cab itself, not just the air outside. He glanced nervously around the truck, but everything was exactly as it had been. No strange figures, no shadowy presence in the corner. But the air felt wrong. Too cold. The silence was suffocating. All the noise from the road, the humming of the truck's engine, everything faded as if the cold had sucked all the life out of the world around him. His stomach twisted with unease. The frosted glass on the windows began to spread like a virus, delicate ice patterns blooming across the windshield, creeping over the side windows. The defroster was on full blast, but it did nothing. The cold just kept spreading, growing, thicker and colder by the second. Jake's breath fogged in front of him, his hands shaking harder now. He could feel the cold on the back of his neck, the sensation of it crawling up his spine. It wasn't just the temperature, it was something else. Something that made his skin crawl. He glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something moving behind him, something, or someone, lurking in the darkness. But there was nothing there. Just the black road stretching endlessly behind him. Still, the cold remained, deep and unnatural. He could almost hear it, as if the chill itself had a sound, a low, unsettling hum. Jake's fingers moved from the steering wheel to the radio dial, desperate for something to distract him. He needed to break the silence, anything to drown out the feeling that something was terribly wrong. But as his fingers brushed the radio, he froze. There it was again, the faintest trace of that dry, rasping laugh, just on the edge of his hearing, like a whisper in the cold. His heart skipped a beat. He jerked his hand back, eyes wide. The laugh faded quickly, but it was enough. Enough to send a shiver down his spine. He slammed the radio off, but the cold didn't go away. It lingered, wrapping itself around him like a ghost, a constant presence that refused to let go. The air was too still, too silent, as if the world outside had vanished completely, leaving him alone in this frigid, unnatural stillness. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but it only made the cold feel worse, more real. He wasn't alone. Not really. Something was with him in the truck. Something was following him, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. But for now, all he could do was drive, and hope the cold would somehow fade. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still with him. The memory of his unsettling smile, that twisted grin that seemed to stretch impossibly wide across his face, haunted him. It wasn't just the appearance of the man. It was the way he had moved, the way he had clung to the truck, as if he was part of the night itself, something that shouldn't have existed but did, nonetheless. Every time Jake glanced in the rearview mirror, he half expected to see him there, standing in the darkness, just out of sight, his eyes glowing like two coals in the night. It was ridiculous, he knew. He had driven away. He had escaped. But something in the pit of his stomach told him that the man wasn't done. That smile. It had been far too familiar. He could almost hear the man's voice in his mind, that strange, raspy laugh that had echoed from the radio, the unsettling whisper in the wind. "You can't outrun me." The words, though whispered in his head, were still enough to send a cold shiver down his spine. Jake gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. He tried to focus on the road, on the distant lights of the town ahead, but it was hard to concentrate. His mind kept drifting back to that moment when the man had stood there on the road, arms stretched wide like he was waiting to welcome Jake into some twisted embrace. Why me? Jake couldn't stop asking himself that question. What had made him a target? What had he done to draw the attention of something like that? As the miles passed, the unease only deepened. The radio crackled to life again, breaking the silence. He jumped, his heart pounding. But no voice came through. Just static. Then, slowly, the static cleared, and there it was, that laugh. So faint at first, it almost felt like he imagined it. But then it grew, rising in volume, more distinct. He clenched his eyes shut for a moment, trying to block it out, but it was too late. He could hear it. That horrible, dry chuckle that seemed to crawl under his skin, sending a wave of dread through his chest. Jake's stomach twisted. He wanted to pull over, to get out of the truck and run, but the road ahead was empty. There was nowhere to go, nowhere safe. He was stuck in the cab, the sound of the man's laugh echoing in his ears like a nightmare that wouldn't end. He glanced at the rearview mirror again, but this time, he wasn't sure if it was his mind playing tricks or if there really was something there. Just a faint silhouette in the darkness. His heart raced, his breath catching in his throat. The image in the mirror flickered, shifting as if something was moving just outside the reach of his headlights. But when he looked closer, all he saw was the road behind him, stretching out into the night. Still, the feeling lingered. He couldn't outrun it. Couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still watching, still waiting. He had left something behind in that chase, something Jake couldn't understand, something that was now tangled in his mind like a web. With every mile, the memories of the man pressed down on him, a heavy weight that he couldn't escape. And deep down, Jake knew. No matter how far he drove, no matter how fast he went, it wasn't over. Not yet. The man wouldn't let him go. Not until he had what he wanted. Jake took a deep breath, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. He was on the road again, heading for the distant lights of the next town, but something was off. The night air, which had once been crisp and fresh, now felt heavy. The weight of it seemed to press against him, thickening the atmosphere inside the cab. Then it hit him. The smell. At first, it was subtle, almost like something out of place, a faint sourness hanging in the air. But as seconds passed, the odor grew stronger, thicker, and more unbearable. It was the kind of smell that made his stomach churn, the kind that clung to your senses and wouldn't let go. A rancid, rotting stench. It was the same smell Jake had noticed when he first encountered the man on the road. The memory flashed through his mind like a jolt of electricity. That nightmarish scent had lingered around the figure, as if his very presence was suffused with decay. The air in the truck grew colder, and the stench filled every corner of the cab, wrapping around him like an invisible hand. His nose twitched, and he covered his mouth, trying to stifle the gag that threatened to escape. It was unbearable, overwhelming, a wave of putrid air that seemed to suffocate him, leaving him no room to breathe. He tried to ignore it, reaching for the air vents to crank the fan up higher, hoping it would clear out the smell. But the air just kept getting worse, thicker, more suffocating. His mind raced as the thought crossed his mind. What was that? It couldn't just be a coincidence, could it? The man had disappeared from the road, but now, it was like he had left something behind. The smell was spreading, seeping into his clothes, his hair. It made him feel dirty, like he was covered in something foul that he couldn't wash away. He needed to get it out. He needed to get away from it. Jake quickly rolled down the window, desperate for fresh air, but even as the cold night wind rushed in, the stench didn't fade. It hung around him, clinging to the truck like an unwelcome presence. The faint sound of the radio crackled again, but this time, there was nothing familiar about it. No voice. Just that buzzing. The same eerie, distorted static. It was as if the truck itself was trying to tell him something. Something dark, something he wasn't ready to face. The stench lingered in the cab like a warning. A reminder that no matter how far he drove, no matter how much he tried to outrun it, he would never escape. The road stretched on ahead, endless, winding into the darkness, and Jake knew then that he wasn't just driving away from the man on the road. He was driving away from something much worse. Something that had marked him, had followed him, and would never let him go. Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel as the truck sped down the dark, winding road. His mind raced, his heart hammering in his chest, but his body remained oddly still, almost numb. That feeling was back again, the creeping sensation that he was no longer alone. It was subtle at first, the sound barely perceptible above the hum of the engine and the rush of wind through the cracked window. A faint sound, a soft scrape of shoes against gravel, like someone was walking just behind him. It's nothing, Jake told himself, shaking his head as if to clear away the fog of paranoia clouding his thoughts. It's just the wind, just the road. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. His eyes darted nervously to the side mirror, half expecting to see the figure he'd tried to leave behind standing there. But no, there was nothing. Just the dark, endless stretch of the road behind him, swallowed by the night. Then, the sound came again, louder this time. It was unmistakable, footsteps, slow and deliberate, as though someone was following him, taking each step carefully, just a few paces behind the truck. The echo of each footfall seemed to reverberate in his mind, dragging him deeper into the growing panic. No, 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 Jake thought, his pulse quickening. I'm imagining things. But even as he thought it, the steps continued. They grew louder, closer, unmistakably real. He could almost hear the shuffling of the person's feet, the sound of the gravel crunching beneath their weight, just a little too close for comfort. He glanced at the side mirror again. No one. The silence in the truck felt suffocating now, thicker than before, pressing against him like a vice. He forced himself to look ahead, to focus on the road, but the footsteps were still there, right behind him, never faltering, never stopping. It was like whoever, or whatever, was out there was deliberately staying just out of view, deliberately remaining just behind him. Jake's eyes snapped to the rearview mirror, the trembling in his hands starting to make the truck sway on the road. The mirror reflected only the empty stretch of highway, the blackness of the night swallowing everything in its path. But the footsteps, they were there, still trailing him. His heart raced, pounding in his ears, and his breath quickened. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead, his neck stiffening. What was it? Who was it? There was no one around. Just the road, the endless night, and the creeping fear that something was walking right behind him. He slammed his foot on the gas, the truck lurching forward as he pushed the pedal down, desperate to outrun the sound. But it didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. The footsteps matched his pace, right in time with the beat of the truck's engine, as if they were connected to him, as if they were keeping track of every move he made. It's real. It's real. Jake's mind screamed, but he couldn't stop. The sound continued, growing louder as he drove faster. The pressure in his chest mounted, his stomach twisting into knots. He could feel it now, the presence that had been chasing him all night, the thing that followed him everywhere he went. He couldn't shake it. It was there, with him, every step of the way. Jake's mind was reeling. His heart pounded as the footsteps behind him grew louder, faster. He couldn't escape them, couldn't outrun the sound, no matter how hard he pressed the pedal to the floor. It was like whatever was back there was keeping pace with him, matching him step for step, never letting up. And then, just as the fear began to overwhelm him, he heard something else. A voice. It wasn't from outside the truck. It didn't come from the radio. It came from deep within his own mind, as though someone was whispering directly in his ear, though he was completely alone in the cab. Stop. Stop running. The voice was smooth, calm, almost too calm. It sent a shiver down his spine, its cold tone creeping into his bones. You can't outrun me. You can't escape. Jake slammed his hands against the steering wheel, desperately trying to focus. No, this isn't real, he thought. It's just my head playing tricks on me. I'm just tired. I've been driving for too long. But the voice didn't stop. It only grew clearer, more insistent, as if it was waiting for him to listen. You're mine now, it said, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, yet the words rang loud and clear in his mind. You've always been mine. You just didn't know it yet. He felt his pulse race, the blood rushing in his ears as his grip on the wheel tightened. No, he thought fiercely, trying to block it out. I'm not yours. I'm not like those others. But the voice was unrelenting. It didn't care about his defiance. It didn't care about his fight. You can't escape what's already inside you, it whispered, its tone shifting now, turning dark, as if enjoying the terror it was creating. You chose this road. You've always been on it. You just didn't know it until now. Jake's vision blurred, his thoughts becoming a tangled mess. His head felt like it was spinning, as though the road was twisting in ways it shouldn't, as though the world was bending around him. He gripped the wheel harder, his knuckles white, as the voice continued to swirl in his head. You're already one of us, Jake. You've always been one of us. The truck's headlights suddenly flickered, casting long, ghostly shadows across the road. Jake blinked, trying to focus, but the voice kept pulling at his mind, tugging at him like a string, making it harder and harder to think clearly. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on. His body felt like it was shutting down, his mind consumed by the echoing words that wouldn't stop, that never stopped. The road stretched out before him, endless, a twisting path that had no end. The voice was right. There was no escape. There never had been. Jake's truck pulled into the gas station, the only sign of life for miles around. The flickering neon lights cast a sickly glow over the empty lot, making everything feel off, like the world had shifted into something strange, something just out of reach of his understanding. He parked the truck at one of the pumps, feeling the heavy weight of the silence settle around him. The gas station looked like it had been stuck in time. The pumps were old, their chrome worn and scratched, the numbers on the displays barely visible. There was no one at the counter, no sign of movement inside the small convenience store. Everything was still, unnervingly still. Jake stepped out of the truck, his boots hitting the pavement with a dull thud that echoed in the stillness. He didn't want to be here, not now, not with the feeling that something was watching him. But his gas light had been blinking for the last hour, and he had no choice. He needed fuel, and this was the only place in sight. He glanced around, scanning the lot, but there was nothing. No cars, no people, just the hum of the neon sign overhead and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. The air was thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he walked toward the pump, his eyes darting from side to side, half expecting to see something, lurking in the shadows. He reached for the nozzle, his hand trembling slightly as he unscrewed the cap and began to fill the tank. The sound of the fuel flowing into the truck was oddly loud in the silence, a constant stream that made Jake's ears ring. He tried to shake the feeling of being watched, but it wouldn't go away. Every few seconds, he would glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind him, but the lot remained empty, save for his truck and the dying glow of the gas station. Then, as he was finishing up, something caught his eye. A figure, standing just inside the door of the convenience store. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light. A shadow, something fleeting. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw it clearly. A man. His face was obscured by the darkness, but Jake could make out the silhouette, tall, thin, with an odd, unnatural posture. The man wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at Jake from inside the store. Jake's heart began to race. He couldn't see his face, but the posture was wrong, too rigid, like he wasn't quite human. Something about the way he stood made Jake's skin crawl, a feeling deep in his gut that told him to leave, to get back in the truck and drive as far away from this place as possible. But Jake couldn't look away. The figure's eyes seemed to lock with his, even from the distance, even with the dim light between them. And then, slowly, the man raised his hand, just a little, as if beckoning him. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He stood frozen, unsure of what to do, his mind scrambling to make sense of the situation. The voice inside his head, the one that had been whispering to him for miles, grew louder now, the same voice, cold and distant, saying, "You've been drawn here. He's waiting for you. It's time." His pulse hammered in his ears, and before he could even think, he grabbed the pump nozzle, shoved it back into place, and rushed to his truck, heart pounding in his chest. The door slammed behind him as he fumbled for the keys, his hands slick with sweat. He started the engine, his eyes still on the figure in the store, who hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. The moment the truck roared to life, he slammed the gas pedal to the floor, the tires squealing as he pulled away from the station, not daring to look back. The gas station, whatever that place had been, faded into the distance, swallowed by the darkness. But Jake knew, deep down, that the figure was still there, waiting. And no matter how fast he drove, that presence would be with him, lingering just at the edge of his mind. As Jake drove farther down the empty road, the tension in his chest didn't ease. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white as he tried to push away the eerie feeling that had settled into his bones. The gas station and its strange figure were quickly fading in the rearview mirror, but the unease stayed with him like a shadow, lurking in the corners of his mind. The road stretched on, endless and desolate. He hadn't seen another vehicle for miles, and that alone made the silence feel louder, more oppressive. His thoughts were spinning. Too much had happened too quickly. The figure, the strange voice, the way it felt like something was pulling him deeper into whatever nightmare he'd stumbled into. That's when he saw the headlights in the distance, two bright spots cutting through the darkness. The truck appeared from behind a curve, its engine growling low as it closed the gap between them. Jake didn't know why, but a part of him felt a strange relief at the sight of another driver. Maybe it was the isolation, or maybe it was just the need for some human connection, even if brief. He eased off the gas, allowing the other truck to catch up. The other driver pulled alongside him, his rig a massive blue Freightliner with a dented grille and a sticker that read Road Warrior on the side. The man behind the wheel was older, his face weathered and lined from years on the road. He gave Jake a quick nod, then revved the engine, gesturing for Jake to pull over. Reluctantly, Jake veered onto the shoulder, rolling to a stop in front of the other truck. The driver slowed down, parked next to him, and killed the engine. The silence between them felt heavy, the low hum of their idling trucks the only sound in the air. The other driver climbed out, his boots scraping on the gravel as he made his way over to Jake's truck. He wore a faded baseball cap, his face partially hidden in the shadows. As he approached, Jake rolled down the window, trying to ignore the unease that gnawed at him. "Hey there," the driver said, his voice gruff but friendly. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Everything all right?" Jake hesitated for a moment. What could he even say? He couldn't exactly explain what had happened, at least not without sounding insane. But something about this guy, his worn-out smile, and the comfortable, no-nonsense way he stood there, made Jake feel like maybe he wasn't alone in this madness. "Just weird night," Jake replied, keeping his voice steady. "Been on the road for too long, I guess." The driver chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I hear ya. This stretch of road does that to a man. You get to thinking things are just a little too quiet, you know?" Jake's heart skipped a beat. The way the man said it made him feel like he wasn't the only one who had felt the weight of the silence pressing in. Like maybe he wasn't the only one who'd noticed how wrong things felt. "Yeah, I've been feeling that," Jake said, trying to sound casual. "It's been one of those nights. Long drive, weird vibes." The driver nodded, his expression darkening for a moment. "Yeah, that's how it gets out here. But listen, don't go fooling yourself, all right? You're not alone out here. Something about this road, it calls to people. You can't just ignore it." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, his eyes flicking to the driver's face, looking for any sign of a joke, any indication that this was just a weird guy rambling. But there was none. The man's face was hard, eyes like chips of stone. "You ever seen something you can't explain?" The driver continued, leaning in closer. "Happens to a lot of us out here. Just don't let it get to you. If you feel it, just keep moving. Don't stop." Jake's stomach churned, and for a moment, the road in front of him blurred. The world seemed to narrow down to just the man standing there, his words hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. Jake started, but the man held up a hand, cutting him off. "Look, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just telling you. You're not the first to feel it. It comes for you when you're not paying attention. Just keep your eyes open. And if you see something strange, you don't need to understand it. You just need to keep moving." With that, the man gave Jake a final nod, turning back to his truck. Before Jake could say anything else, the driver climbed back into his cab, slammed the door, and revved the engine. Without another word, the blue Freightliner pulled back onto the road, disappearing into the night as if it had never been there. Jake sat there, staring at the empty road ahead. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white as the words the man had said echoed in his mind. "You're not alone out here. Something about this road, it calls to people." He didn't know what to think anymore, but he sure as hell wasn't staying on this road any longer than he had to. He threw the truck back into gear, the engine roaring to life as he pulled back onto the highway, his eyes scanning the dark road ahead for whatever might be waiting for him next. The road seemed to stretch endlessly in front of Jake, the darkness pressing in around him as the headlights cut through the thickening fog. His mind was still racing from his brief encounter with the other trucker, and he couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep in his chest. The man's words about the road calling to people, about something watching, kept replaying in his head. Was it just the isolation, or was there something more? His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. Jake quickly reached for it, hoping it was a call that would help him make sense of everything. He glanced down at the screen. No signal. A sinking feeling hit his stomach. He tried again, toggling the settings and checking the reception bars. Nothing. He was in the middle of nowhere, the dark expanse of road surrounding him with no signs of civilization. No nearby towns, no gas stations, nothing. The thought of being stranded out here without any way to reach help was enough to make him feel the weight of panic creeping in again. "Come on," Jake muttered to himself, holding the phone out in front of him, hoping the signal might magically appear. He tried dialing anyway, even if it was hopeless. The phone rang, once, twice, but then the call failed before he could hear a voice. He cursed under his breath, tapping at the screen in frustration. The road ahead twisted into another sharp turn, and Jake was momentarily distracted. He pulled the truck around the bend, still clutching the phone in his hand, willing it to work, when something strange happened. The screen flickered briefly, a brief flash of static dancing across the display. For a split second, it almost looked like a message popped up, but before he could read it, the phone went blank. His stomach churned. The phone wasn't turning back on. No matter how many times he pressed the power button, it remained black. This was getting ridiculous. First, the strange encounter with the man at the gas station, now this. It was as if the world was against him, or worse, like something was trying to prevent him from reaching out. "Just great," Jake muttered, tossing the phone into the passenger seat. His eyes flicked nervously to the rearview mirror, expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the shadows behind him. But there was nothing. Just the empty stretch of road that seemed to go on forever, and the fog, now thicker than ever, closing in around him like an impenetrable wall. He shook his head, trying to focus. He couldn't afford to get worked up over things he couldn't control. He still had to get out of here, still had to make it to wherever this road would take him. He wasn't sure what was out there, but he was getting closer to the edge of his sanity. The deeper he drove, the more disconnected from reality he felt. Just a few more miles, just a few more miles, Jake whispered to himself, his grip tightening on the wheel. His mind kept racing. He had to stay focused. He couldn't let whatever this was get to him. The next few miles felt like an eternity, the fog growing thicker, the road winding endlessly. He glanced over at the passenger seat, his phone still dead, as if mocking him. Without a working phone, he was cut off from the world. He couldn't ignore the eerie thought in the back of his mind anymore. Something wasn't right, but he had to keep moving. There was no turning back now. The miles kept slipping away beneath Jake's tires, but with each passing second, the unease that had been simmering in the pit of his stomach was growing. He could feel it. Something wasn't right. The feeling of being watched, the phone failures, the strange encounter with the trucker, it was all too much. His rational mind screamed that it was just the isolation, the endless road playing tricks on him, but the doubts crept in regardless. "Am I losing it?" he muttered aloud, his voice rough in the silence of the cab. It was late, too late, and the weight of the hours on the road was starting to get to him. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe the fog was messing with his head. Maybe he was starting to see things where there was nothing. He checked the mirrors again, just to be sure, even though there hadn't been a single vehicle on the road for miles. No sign of anyone following him. But his pulse quickened. The fog was thick, but not thick enough to block out everything. So why did it feel like someone was lurking just beyond his line of sight? Get it together, Jake muttered, shaking his head. He wasn't some rookie trucker. He'd been on the road long enough to know how to handle isolation, long hauls, and even weird encounters. But this felt different. Like there was something more than just fatigue and the darkness of the night. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was after 2:30 in the morning. The exhaustion was creeping into his bones now, making him second-guess everything. He could barely focus on the road in front of him, and his hands were starting to feel like they weren't his own, gripping the wheel with a death-like tightness. He was hallucinating. That's all. That had to be it. But as the truck hummed steadily along the road, Jake couldn't shake the thought that maybe it wasn't just fatigue after all. Maybe he wasn't just imagining the unsettling sounds, or the strange cold that seemed to slip through the vents. Maybe the man at the gas station hadn't been a trick of the mind either. Maybe there was something out there, something he hadn't fully realized was following him, watching him, or worse, something he hadn't even begun to understand. Jake's eyes flickered nervously to the rearview mirror again, then to the side windows. Everything was dark. He was in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the nearest town. There was no reason to feel so paranoid, and yet the sensation gnawed at him like a constant itch he couldn't scratch. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing up, but he couldn't tell if it was from the cold or if it was something else. He rubbed his face, trying to shake the thoughts from his head, but they kept coming back. The man, the strange feeling, the things he couldn't explain. He'd seen things before on the road, weird sightings, strange people. It was just part of the life, right? The stories you tell yourself to make it through. But this was different. This felt more real, more personal. Maybe I'm just tired, Jake whispered to himself, trying to make sense of it all. His voice echoed back at him in the empty cab. Yeah, just tired. But deep down, a part of him knew better. Something was wrong. And no matter how hard he tried to push the thoughts away, they kept pulling him back. Every mile, every twist of the road seemed to confirm it. There was something following him. And worse, he had no idea what it was or how to escape it. As Jake's headlights cut through the fog, he began to notice something in the distance, something strange. At first, it was just a shadow, a faint outline barely visible in the dim light. But as he drew closer, it became clearer, a sign. But not just any sign. It was old, weathered, the kind that looked like it hadn't been touched in years, and the eerie glow of his headlights seemed to make it stand out even more. The sign was wooden, with faded white letters painted across it, though some of them had worn away completely. He squinted, trying to make out what it said as he slowly rolled the truck forward. But there was something odd about the way the sign looked. The wood was warped, as though it had been subjected to years of neglect, and the edges of the letters were jagged, almost as if someone had scratched them into the wood by hand. When he got close enough to read it, his stomach dropped. Turn back now, the sign read. It was simple, clear, and yet somehow, it made his pulse race. Why was it here, in the middle of nowhere? No one had mentioned anything about a roadblock or detour ahead. There was no reason for the sign to be here, not in the middle of the night, and especially not on a route that Jake had driven dozens of times before. His heart skipped a beat as a chill ran through him. He slowed the truck, his hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. The words seemed to echo in his head, turn back now. He checked his mirrors again. No cars. No headlights behind him. Just the emptiness of the road stretching out before him, the fog swallowing up the distance. But why was this sign here? The road seemed fine. Empty, yes, but no indication that there was anything wrong. It wasn't like there were any other roads to take, no easy way out. It was either go forward or turn around. Jake sat for a moment, staring at the sign. The weight of it felt heavier than the fog surrounding him. It almost felt like a warning, like something was waiting for him ahead, something he wasn't ready to face. But what was it? And who put this sign here in the first place? He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Just a sign, he muttered. Just some freaky coincidence. Nothing to get worked up over. But even as he said the words, something in his gut told him that wasn't the case. That this was part of something bigger, something he couldn't fully understand yet. Something that was about to catch up with him. He glanced down at the road ahead, the fog thickening once more. With a reluctant exhale, he stepped on the gas and drove past the sign, the words still haunting him in the rearview mirror. Turn back now. The sign faded into the mist, but its message lingered in his mind. And with every mile that passed, Jake couldn't help but wonder if turning back was really the safer choice.